So the question's been asked, besides many, what can the members of American Jewry do to assist the State of Israel? I'll give you just a couple of ideas. The first thing and the most important thing is this. I have personally been on more than 400 university campuses to lecture, and I've been on many more accompanying co-lecturers as they go to your universities. And one of the things that alarms me, and I say this with all due deference to the tremendous feats achieved by the members of American Jewry, feats which were far beyond anything we ever brought about in Anglo Jewry. What consistently alarms me is this. There are entire generations of Jewish students who are graduating high schools, who oftentimes come from very Zionistic homes, who oftentimes are educated in very Zionistic secondary schools. Just one moment. Madam, if you're filming, can I ask you to refrain from doing so? Thank you very much. Who oftentimes come from very Zionistic secondary schools. And they arrive on their university campuses in an era where the State of Israel is oftentimes defamed. And they arrive there completely, totally and utterly ill-equipped to conjure with any of the vitriol that is sent their way. And the reason for that is in no small part that within the secondary school education in many Jewish high schools, I don't even want to think about the public high schools, in many Jewish high schools, there is no Israel history curriculum at the core of the required learning. Now, I'm not naming any particular high school. I'm not dealing with every single high school. I'm saying as a broad rule of thumb, that is the case. So, the first thing that I would say is, remember that we are the people of the book. Invest in the education of the Jewish future. Invest in your children who will be your students, who will be your legislators, who will be your leaders. And implement without delay a rigorous Israel history course at the core of the required learning. All of the Talmudic learning is very, very virtuous, and I frankly wish that we had had something like that in the United Kingdom. We did not have that. But it now must be married up with rigorous Israel history education, and that should be comprised of the ancient connection to Israel, modern history of the State of Israel, current events as they pertain to the State of Israel, and only by doing that can the Jewish future somehow shape the future of Israel, the country, as well. In the absence of those things, what is happening is Jewish students are rendered silent because they do not know how to battle back, or, far worse, they actually turn their coats and their faces against the story of Israel, and they begin to criticize actively and proactively the State of Israel before the entire student body. And you should know that one Jewish voice, identified as such, that condemns the State of Israel is worth 1,000 voices who are saying the very same thing, but not from the perspective of being Jewish. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I think is very, very important is you must become politically enfranchised. You should not assume that somebody else is doing your bidding when it comes to your views about Israel being put across to your legislators. Every year, several times a year, as you heard during the introduction, we have the privilege of arranging briefings by senior members of the Israel Defense Forces and the Israeli National Police for members of the United States Congress and the United States Senate. Do you know how we arrange that, madam? We pick up the phone.
AIPAC?
No, nothing to do with AIPAC. We pick up the phone and we call them. You live in such a wonderful, open democracy that your legislators are actually contactable. You can actually arrange meetings, you can actually arrange briefings. And you need to find a vehicle via which you feel comfortable enfranchising yourself in the political process. Now, you can do this in a way that I can't. I am not a citizen of the United States. I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I'm not a voter in the United States of America, and therefore when we go to Congress, we go there to educate, never to lobby. But you are able to do that. You are able to lobby and you are able to press your point. So that's the second thing. Don't assume that somebody else is doing your bidding. And if you do assume that somebody else is doing your bidding, know what legislation they are pushing. That's the second thing. The third thing is this. I really believe that you have to bring to bear the power of the purse. And what I mean by that is that in many a university campus, I will stand in an auditorium and it says on the back of the wall, so-and-so Goldfine dedicated this auditorium in memory of such and such. And in that room, there's a falsehood about Israel being taught. And I think that you ought to be in touch with the deans of such institutions, and you ought to say that unless, not you, madam, but members of American Jewry, which was the basis of your question, that unless balance is brought to the dynamic on campus with regard to the state of Israel, you will withhold, withdraw, or redirect your endowments to that institution. Now, there's a very clear precedent for this, and I'm going to give you just a swift example, and then I'll move on to the next question. The Saudi Arabian Kingdom gave a time-released contribution to the Palestinian Authority of $20 million to be handed to them in annual increments across 5 years. By contrast, the same kingdom gave $20 million to Georgetown University, where future legislators yearn to study, and $20 million to Harvard University, which is arguably the most prestigious university anywhere in the world, right after my university, University of Manchester. But they're buying up your education system. And it's not a coincidence. It's not a haphazard gesture of largesse and generosity. They are seeking to influence the future legislators of the United States of America, who today are your students. And it will only take 15 to 20 years before those students are in situ. The last thing is this. I'm urging you, please, and here is a rare opportunity for me to say this, try to learn the lessons of European Jewry before they are upon you here in America. And I'm not referring to anything related to the Holocaust. I'm referring to my life and my existence in the United Kingdom. I'm referring to the fact that you need to understand as American Jews that anti-Semitism exists. You need to understand that anti-Semitism is unmasked. You need to understand that anti-Semitism is finding its way towards your students in your campuses. And you need to realize that one of the reasons that many members of American Jewry are unable quite to see this is that you have until now enjoyed a very favorable existence in the United States of America, but it's changing, and it's changing on your campuses. One of the things that I believe you urgently have to do, for example, is define anti-Semitism. I believe that anti-Semitism is defined thus. It's demanding of the Jewish people that we accept upon ourselves a standard that no other people would be so much as asked to consider. And when you define anti-Semitism, you can recognize it. When you recognize it, you can work to combat it. But if one wants to consistently imagine that it's everything other than what it is, you're going to lose the day there. You're going to lose the battle on the university campuses. And I believe that this battle is actually eminently winnable because of how great the United States of America is. I don't believe it's winnable in Europe. And one final point, and I said that the previous point was my last, but this really will be my last. You have to simplify the narrative when it comes to supporting the State of Israel. I can tell you what all of the Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace are talking about when they campaign in the courtyards of the university campuses. They say pre-67 borders, the rights of return, occupation, and that these are the religious and holy sites of the Muslim and the Arab people. That is what they say from Cornell University to the University of Seattle. It's absolutely uniform. I spoke to you today about the importance and the significance of uniform. Now, you're all friends of Israel. I challenge any of you here to raise your hands and to tell me the official narrative that we have when it comes to our claim to that land. And by the way, don't tell me the one you'd like it to be. Tell me the one that you hear from every federation. Tell me the one you hear from every pulpit. Tell me the one that you hear from every JCC. Tell me the one that you taught to your children. And the reason that there's a stony silence that's descended upon the room is that there isn't one. We've completely lost sight of ourselves. You have to streamline the narrative, because I give you my word, when you speak to an open-minded individual who wants to know why we're over there in the State of Israel doing what it is that we do, when you start talking to them about, well, we're willing to swap 98% of this land and halve this capital city and repatriate this part of the population in the pursuit of peace with land concession, they've no idea what you're talking about. And there's no earthly reason that they would have an idea of what you're talking about. But if you make a clear-cut statement from which you can launch a nuanced conversation, then you have a chance. That's the power of a streamlined narrative. And I'm not going to tell the members of American Jewry precisely what that narrative should be. I am going to urge you to do one thing. Do not abandon the Jewish aspect of that narrative. Do not abandon the Jewish aspect of that narrative. People say, well, if you tell them it's the homeland of the Jewish people, they'll never accept it. My response to that is, I challenge you to direct me to the narrative by way of which they do accept us. You can talk about the technology, and I hope you will. You should emphasize the democracy, and I hope that you will. You can certainly speak about the history that the people of Israel have faced in the absence of the state of Israel. But don't you do any of that without emphasizing the ancient Jewish connection between our people and that land. It's very, very important. And even our most outspoken adversaries, when you say that, understand that. They may not like it, but they certainly understand it. I'll take one last question. Yes, sir.
With the rise of the alt-right, Charlottesville, the reaction to it by a leader, what happened in the UK with Brexit, and the extreme anti-Semitism within the government and without the government, could you comment on whether the people of Israel know that we in America, not just our children on the college campuses, but we ourselves are under extreme attack, and it's condoned by a leader, even-handed, everything else. Any change in the people of Israel's thoughts?
So I'm not precisely sure of what your question is. Can you? I heard your preamble, but what's your question?
Israel aware that the rise of the white supremacists in America to speak out and attack the Jewish people almost every day online, what's going on?
Okay, I understand your question, sir. So I'm not actually going to take that question, and the reason that I'm not going to take that question is it's an important question, but it's not within my remit to take it, because I am here as a citizen of the State of Israel. The State of Israel has its own challenges within its internal discourse, and I don't like it when another country comes and tells me in Israel how the State of Israel should maneuver and work towards its best version of its own future, and therefore I will never do that as an Israeli, certainly when I'm here in another country. But I will tell you this, because I like controversy. So let's have this discussion just for a moment. I'm not a Democrat, and I'm not a Republican. I'm not a citizen of the United States of America. And the discussions and the subjects that you have touched upon, and many more, are certainly worthy of rigorous and robust debate, discussion, and illumination here in the United States of America. I happen to be a lover of the United States of America. I happen to be a fan of the United States of America. And if time permitted, which it doesn't, I would tell you the story of why Our Soldiers Speak is a quintessentially American tale. It could only have happened in the United States of America. No other country could have facilitated what America has facilitated for us. And therefore I'm concerned, but I'm concerned in my capacity strictly as an observer. So I'm concerned, and I have my thoughts and I have my feelings about whether or not gerrymandering is a good idea. I have my thoughts and my feelings on the virtue or lack thereof of the Electoral College. I have my thoughts and my ideas on whether, and I don't say this in any way to amuse anybody here, I have my concerns and my thoughts about whether or not NFL players should take a knee during the singing of the national anthem, and whether or not a president should wade into that. I have my concerns on the composition of the Supreme Court. And I have been on ground in the run-up to 3 presidential elections. 2 for President Obama, 1 for President Trump. But that conversation, sir, is for you as Americans to have, because you as Americans will live with the outcome of that debate and that conversation. It's not for an Israeli to wade into. Now, where do I have a right to wade in? And this may give you something to consider. It also may not. And I want it to be clear that I say this in my name and my name only. Not on behalf even of my organization, certainly not on behalf of the people of Israel, where there is a whole run of different viewpoints on everything, and not on behalf of the Israeli government, the foreign ministry, or the organization that's hosting me here today. But I'm a citizen of the State of Israel. I'm a soldier who has served in the State of Israel. It's the country I call home, and I'm an active participant there. I'm not an observer. I'm a participant. And I will tell you the following. Strictly on the issue of Israel, I want to repeat that for everybody here. Strictly on the issue of Israel, I believe there's an awful lot to find favor in when it comes to the current policies of this particular White House, and I want to express why. You will remember that Bashar al-Assad, I'll do it in 3 ways. Bashar al-Assad launched a horrendous chemical attack against his own people that President Obama expressed he felt ought to be punished by way of a military strike. Now, President Obama expressed that he was for a strike on the Syrian government and its Air Force in particular. But he also expressed that he was going to hand that matter to Congress for their deliberations. Now, I want to make something very, very clear here before I take one step further. It's absolutely the right and the remit of the American president to run American policy through whichever channels he, or one day she, feels is appropriate. Many of us want an American president to act in the best interests of Israel. That's actually not their job. The job of an American president is to act in the best interests of the American people. And so Congress deliberated over the course of the weekend, I believe, and ultimately Congress turned its face against the strike, which again is absolutely within the remit of Congress to reach a decision upon. But let me tell you what happened in Israel. What happened in Israel was that an urgent call came from the government of the State of Israel that every citizen of the country was to immediately report to makeshift depots to collect gas masks for themselves and for every member of their family. And the streets of Israel were lined with panic-induced citizens who were sent to collect a gas mask because the calculation of the Israeli government was that if struck by the United States, Assad may launch a retaliatory strike against an American ally, namely the State of Israel, and gas Israeli citizens. Now just consider that for a moment. Imagine that I was to announce to all of you here that you must urgently report to depots to collect gas masks. You would be horrified, and I dare say you would not know at all what to do in that situation, and nor should you have to know, any more than we in Israel should have to know. But my sister went and she stood in the baking sun to collect the gas masks. My brother went. Pregnant women went. The gas mask that I was brought is still at the foot of my bed to this day. Not because I'm fearful of a chemical attack, that's where I decided to leave it and I haven't moved it from there. But if you think I ever imagined owning a gas mask, you would be wrong. That's what happened in the State of Israel. By contrast, Assad again in April of this year, I believe, launched a chemical attack against his own people, and without any pronouncement, without any announcement, without any warning, President Trump launched, I believe it was 62 Tomahawk missiles into the Syrian military facilities. And that did not cause any disruption for the people of Israel. There was no retaliation that came against the people of Israel. There was no panic in the streets of Israel. And I'm just telling you as one simple citizen of the State of Israel, I prefer that dynamic. And it's not about one being a Democrat and one being a Republican. I prefer that dynamic. The second example I will give is this. Sir, are you still with me? Okay. The second example I will give is this. Successive governments of the United States of America, Republican and Democrat alike, have set about applying enormous amounts of pressure to governments of the State of Israel to enter into what is called the two-state solution as a keynote bedrock of the American foreign policy. Now, there's a perception overseas that the two-state solution is an all-done deal and all that's required is two signatures on the piece of paper and everything will be fine. With a view to being fully candid with you, as I assured that I would be, I'm completely opposed to the two-state solution as currently understood. I see no virtue to it and I think it's time to move on to different solutions. I think that an end to the conflict can be brought about, but I think we have to reimagine the method through which we will get there. That pressure that has been brought by successive administrations, and I repeat, Democrat and Republican alike, has brought Israel, under the auspices of left-leaning and right-leaning prime ministers, incidentally, to face vilification within the international community for obstructing the pathway toward peace. Wrongly so. And it has also brought about the singling out of the State of Israel in international fora, which I'll come to as my last point. By contrast, this administration in the White House has brought no such pressure. There's not been any stipulation thus far, it can change, but there's been no such stipulation thus far from the Trump administration that the State of Israel must give away this amount of land, remove this number of Jews from their homes, and divide this part of our capital city. And again, as just one simple citizen of the State of Israel, I prefer that. Because I think that the people of Israel have earned the right to determine their own future in their land. That's what this is all about when we say, Liyot am chofshi ba'artzenu, to be a free people in our land. And either that means something or it doesn't mean something. Now, where do I add a layer of complexity to this as an Israeli citizen? I believe it's incumbent upon the government of the State of Israel to move with the uppermost urgency toward putting forward a plan to end the conflict and not to luxuriate in the space it's being granted by this administration. If we are not for the two-state solution, let us say we are not for the two-state solution. If we have an alternative, let us champion that alternative. But let us not stand pat. That would be a strategic error. And the final thing that I will say is, in 2014, a few short weeks after the conclusion of Operation Protective Edge, the President of the United States, then Barack Obama, stood at what I believe to be the most international podium anywhere in the world, the podium of the United Nations General Assembly. And after he had given an overview of the global dynamic and so forth, he said something which may have escaped many people's attention, but it did not escape my attention because I was in there, sent to serve in Judea and Samaria. And he said, quote, "After a summer of conflict, too many Israelis are unwilling to undertake the hard work required in order to bring about peace. And that's something worthy of reflection among Israel or within Israel." Now, that comment again as a citizen of the State of Israel, is absolutely unacceptable to me. And it's unacceptable to me because, first of all, the bodies of our dead soldiers were not then, and still are not, returned home for appropriate burial. Secondly, that cannot be a rationalized position, given that no poll was taken to see which Israelis are for hard work and which Israelis are against hard work. Thirdly, it didn't say too many Israeli politicians, it said too many Israelis. Well, I served among those Israelis, and I can tell you they would be willing to give all that they are and all that they have in order to bring about an end to the conflict. It's just a question of how to do it while preserving their future. And finally, I took great issue with the fact that it was stated in front of countries that are sworn to the destruction of the State of Israel. And just to add another bit of controversy to that, I object to the fact that an individual who has never known a day of war tells us what it is to participate in war. I'm not comfortable with that idea at all. I don't think that individual is necessarily qualified to do that. By contrast, President Trump spoke in the UN General Assembly this September, and he only mentioned the State of Israel once, and it was to repudiate Iran's call for the destruction of the State of Israel. And I'm telling you, again, it's just, and I'm not myopic, as a simple citizen of the State of Israel, I prefer that. Where it goes from here, we will wait and see. I think much of it will have to do with how proactive the State of Israel is in putting forward an alternative plan through which we can bring about an end to the conflict while preserving the best of the Jewish state's future, and while bringing about a truly sovereign, independent, free, thriving state for the Palestinian Arabs, which I believe can be done. And if anyone wants to know about it, and then I will cede the floor, you should know that this evening, I, along with a general, am flying to the United Kingdom to brief members of the British Parliament about a new initiative that we're already educating members of the Senate and members of the Congress about, that we're already speaking about in your lead graduate schools in the United States of America, and you can Google it at your convenience. It's called the New State Solution, and the New State Solution calls for a resolution to the ongoing crisis in the Gaza Strip. It calls for the establishment of a free, sovereign, independent, if required or wanted, militarized state, further state for the Palestinian Arabs. And it calls for the establishment of that state to be in the Gaza Strip with contiguity into the Sinai Peninsula, with an entire plan and range of plans for solving the complexities of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. So if you want to know more about it, the New State Solution is what you should look up. You will be hearing a great deal more about it. And I can tell you that it is still the establishment of two states for two peoples living side by side in security. It just reimagines the borders along which such a secure common future can be established. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for having me.